Welcome, hi everyone. So I'm going to start by apologizing. We had some technical problem, but we are really happy to start today the fourth session of our seminar called Symbolon. And maybe before we start, I should introduce why are we doing this? And the answer is in the name of the seminar, which is Symbolon. Symbolon is a Latin word that used to be used to explain what is a token, a broken token that once it's reunited, we can understand the symbol that is expressed in this tablet. And so this is basically what we are trying to do here in this seminar. We want to bring different perspective, different kind of knowledge to hopefully we can get some deeper wisdom to better understand the AI era, the AI itself, and the impact of AI in our life and what we are as a human. Maybe this will help us to better understand what we are. And so today, so just before I introduce our guests, I will show you present the team that is behind this seminar. So Hae-Young Kim, associate researcher at École Normale Supérieure in Paris. Eric Petit, senior research engineer at Intel, based in Portland. And myself, Adel Shaibi, computer scientist at Intel and based in Paris. And so today we are very, very excited and very happy because we have a special guest with us.
Yes.
David Carr, who is professor emerit of philosophy, and I will let my friend Hae-Young Kim introduce our guest.
So I can introduce my friend David. So David Carr, very lovely person. So David got his PhD in philosophy at Yale, and when was it? The year?
1966.
Yes. 1966. And after that, he taught at Yale a little bit too, and in Canada too. But he worked at Emory for a long time as a professor of philosophy. And after that, he went to New York and taught philosophy at New School already 11 years since then. And he's an author of many very important and well-known books in phenomenology and philosophy of history, and also he translated important works of Husserl into English long time ago, but still very important, very much read and cited up to this point. And we're gonna have David talk for us today about science and the birth of phenomenology.
Here is the slide.
Yes.
Science and the birth of phenomenology, yes. So I think we can get started. Maybe just before we start, so this is the topic of today, science and the birth of phenomenology. And so very quickly, we will have a discussion with David Carr, Eric, Hae-Young, and myself, approximately 1 hour, more or less. Then we will have a 5-minute break. And during this break, just to refresh a little bit, and then we will have half an hour or an hour of discussion. And so during the break, we will put the link of the Google Meet on the chat, of the YouTube chat. So you feel free to join so you can take part of the discussion as usual. So this is how we used to do it. And we would like to have people joining and take part of the discussion. So with that, I think we can go ahead. Monsieur David.
Thank you.
Je vous en prie.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much to Adel and to my friend Hae-Young for inviting me here. I'm very happy to be here. And I will try to explain some things. As they've already told you, my philosophical work has been associated with phenomenology. And this, as most of you probably know, is a kind of current or trend. I wouldn't call it a school, but something that was very important starting from the early 20th century and extending to today, it's associated with names like Husserl, Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Paul Ricoeur, and many others. Today, it's very strong in some countries of Europe and certainly in the United States and all over Asia as well. So phenomenology is, as I say, a way of thinking and a way of looking at things. Another thing about me is that I tend to look at things historically. So my take on phenomenology today has to do with how it began, why it began. And that's why I talk about the birth of phenomenology here. And this is something that, as I said, happened in the early part of the 20th century. Now, I'm going to start with a quote, which I'll tell you afterwards where it comes from. Here's the quote. "The gloriously romantic universe of Dante and Milton that set no bounds on the imagination of man as it played over space and time has now been swept away. Space was identified with the realm of geometry, time with the continuity of number. The world that people thought themselves living in, a world rich with color and sound, redolent with fragrance, filled with gladness, love, and beauty, speaking everywhere of the purpose of harmony and creative ideals, was crowded now into the minute corners of the brains of scattered organic beings. The really important world outside was a world hard, cold, colorless, silent, and dead. A world of quantity, a world of mathematically computable notions, motions in mechanical regularity. The world of qualities, as immediately perceived by man, became just a curious and minor effect of that infinite machine beyond. In Newton, the Cartesian metaphysics finally overthrew Aristotelianism and became the prominent worldview of modern times." Now, that's a quote from a book by E.H. Burt called The Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Science, and it's a book that a lot of graduate students of my generation read because they wanted to know about the connection between early modern philosophy and physical science. And of course, he's talking, when he talks about the modern world, he's talking about the world of Galileo, Kepler, and leading up to Newton. He does this in his very incredibly purple prose, a little bit exaggerated, but he's trying to make a point that I think is well taken, that he's making a distinction between the world, reality, as defined by the physics, modern physics, that is Newtonian physics, making a contrast between that and our subjective experience. And if you see, my contention here is that if we want to understand the beginning of phenomenology at the end of the 19th, early beginning of the 20th century, we have to look not so much at the great German philosophers like Kant and Hegel, but at this story about experience, which tells us about the relation between reality and experience. And my claim, as I'll try to show here, is that in the course of the 19th century, these two things, reality and experience, get farther and farther apart. Well, I'll say a little more about that, but if you have studied some philosophy or history of philosophy, you probably recognize this stuff in Burt's book as referring to the distinction between primary and secondary qualities. This is a term that was invented, or a distinction that was invented by John Locke, but it existed long before him. It was already in Galileo, it was in Descartes, and every philosopher at the time understood it. The idea is that some qualities are real and objective and really belong to reality. Others are merely subjective, only seem to belong to reality, but are in fact only subjective. And as Bert says, they're, located somewhere in some corner of our brain. So that distinction is what's going on here, of course, is physics, the great success story of the modern day, right? Is telling us what's real and what's not real. That's its job. And in the process, it's inventing a distinction here that, is very hard to explain. Of course, what's also going on at the same time is that people are beginning to understand anatomy and understand the idea of sense experience. The real objects in the external world impinge upon our senses. The senses convey certain messages to our brains, and that's why we see things as being red, blue, or hard and soft and so forth, whereas the reality out there is the strictly spatial reality, location, motion, locomotion. All these things are part of the real. So we're talking about reality and not reality. And people like Locke in the modern period are giving us a way to make that distinction. One thing about this is that, as far as our experience is concerned, we still have a direct access to reality in the primary qualities. That is, we can see them, but we can also touch them. And we know that while colors change as the light changes, for example, the so-called primary qualities don't change. They're there. We have access to them through our experience.
Can we just make a quick comment about what's the difference of an example of a primary quality versus a secondary quality? Or I guess we will come to it. But...
Well, I think it's pretty easy to explain. I mean, this pen is a spatial object located in space in a certain relation to my experience. It also has a color. It's black.
Yeah.
But, if we change the light, or if there's no light, if the light disappears, it doesn't have any color. So things like color, sound, feelings, smell, these things are relative to the perceiver and unchanged. Primary qualities are not relative. They remain as they are. And so that's how we get this distinction between primary and secondary qualities. But the point is here that we still have access through the primary qualities to reality, direct access through our senses, right? But what's important now is that in the course of the 19th century, this begins to change. And I'll try to describe this briefly in the following way. Of course, we all know this. The use of microscopes and the development of molecular theory begin to undermine the relation between perceptual experience and the nature of the real. By the beginning of the 20th century, the scientific conception of reality had advanced from the molecular to the atomic to the subatomic. Reality for the physicist is now something that can only be conceptually represented mathematically, but not perceived. Not only secondary qualities, then, but also primary qualities cannot be taken to represent the real. Now, I want to say a word about mathematics. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but mathematics, of course, played a very important role in this whole development, right? But the nature of mathematics had itself begun to change in the course of the 19th century. From Euclid to Kant, geometry was supposed to represent space. And Euclid's axioms were held to be truths about space. But for the likes of Riemann and Hilbert, axioms and theorems were dependent on definitions that were not really about anything. The move from three-dimensional to n-dimensional space was similar to the movement in physics from what could be experienced to what could only be conceived. The resulting conception of reality had something of a hearsay quality. The layperson is informed by experts about the nature of a reality she cannot see, feel, or touch. At the same time, what is seen and touched is, as Bert said, now crowded into the interior mental landscape of mere appearances. The educated person following the lead of the physicist, who is continuing a tradition of modern scientific inquiry, now confronts a very different reality at the dawn of the 20th century. And here's the point. What is real is not experienced, and what is experienced is not real. So, this is now, my claim here is that this is the situation that's going on. Of course, things are going to change even more rapidly very soon from the turn of the 20th century with Einstein and so on. And the educated layperson is now having to deal with this. Where does philosophy come in? Philosophy is following all this, presumably. And one of the things that philosophy has traditionally been tasked with is telling us what's real. And so if we listen to the physicists, we find out that the real is not experienced and the experience is not real. It's at this point that Husserl enters the scene. And just to say a little bit about him, as I said before, most people look at Husserl and think this is a German philosopher, then it must be Kant and Hegel that stand behind him. But that's not really true. Husserl was trained as a mathematician. He had his doctorate in mathematics, and he was, when he moved into philosophy, he was under the influence of Franz Brentano, people who were really more tuned into British empiricism than to German philosophy. Husserl had no time at all for Hegel and very little for Kant in the early days. He was teaching in Göttingen at that time, which was really the focus of German mathematics. One of his best friends was David Hilbert, somebody I already mentioned, who was involved in all these revolutions in the understanding of mathematics. So Husserl, what I'm trying to say is that Husserl was an educated layman who understood and could follow all the stuff that's going on in science, even though he wasn't participating in it himself. And so he's faced with the problem as a philosopher of how to react to this. And my claim is that he reacts rather differently from other philosophers of the period, who are intent on and feel it's their duty, really, to follow the science. Follow the science, right? The scientists, they're the experts. They know what's real. They're telling us we have to start from there. Husserl takes a somewhat different tack. And what he does, instead of trying to figure out the relationship between reality as defined by physics and experience, is to say, we're not gonna reaffirm science. Doesn't need us. Why should we? We're not going to deny it, certainly. But we're not going to simply accept it either. What he proposes is what he calls the epoché, or the bracketing of reality and science and the scientific attitude in favor of something else. So what he calls bracketing, which is taken over either explicitly or tacitly by the other people I mentioned, like was Heidegger and so on, is it's a different task. The standard approach to understanding experience, according to most philosophers, is to explain it. How does it happen? If you start with that external reality and then tell a story about how it interacts with the body and so forth, you've given it an explanation of experience. Where does it come from? How does it happen? What if there says something different? Not explain it, just describe it. Give a description of what it's like. Why? Because he thinks that the standard approach of epistemology has, because of the influence of science and the concept of reality, distorted experience beyond all recognition.
So it's a descriptive, not an explanatory process. So it's about explaining experience.
Not explaining. He wants to
describing it.
He wants to describe it, not explain it.
Not explaining.
And the reason is he thinks that the description of experience that's given to us by the scientists or the philosophers doesn't make any sense. And, you could say some very simple things in support of this. The watermelon is red and it tastes sweet.
Yeah.
Our experience tells us it's the watermelon that's red. It's not something in my brain. My brain isn't red, isn't pink. It doesn't have any taste. My experience gives us an object that we can feel, touch, eat, and in that way, in other words, we can take our experience seriously as it's given and not try to confuse it with physical or epistemological theory. So that's the main thing to be said about Husserl's innovation here. He also introduces, you might say in some ways it's naive, right? This is a return to naivete from the kind of sophistication that's being given to us by the scientists who are trying to explain our experience, but who in doing so end up with, putting our sense experience in our brain. Maybe it's in the brain in some sense or other, but we don't experience it in the brain. We experience it in the watermelon. Right? So that's the main thing that's going on here, I think. And it's, the return to naivete, Husserl actually didn't invent this. There was another philosopher before him who was actually connected with positivism, a German positivist named Richard Avenarius, who was the one who invented this term, der natürliche Weltbegriff, the natural concept of the world. And although Avenarius, like a lot of positivists, wanted to trace, the trajectory from this naive idea of the world to the sophisticated one that we get in science, Husserl just wanted to say, let's just describe the world as we experience it. Now, this is as I say, I think this is a concept that's taken up perhaps first by Heidegger, but by other phenomenologists in this sort of first generation, but also by French existentialists like Merleau-Ponty and Sartre, and Carr and many others. And it has something to do with, philosophical priorities. This is something that a lot of us philosophers just can't abide. How could you possibly ignore what science is telling us. It's true. It's science.
Scientists.
Therefore, as philosophers, we can't ignore it. We have to take it. We have to take it seriously. And Husserl is denying that. He's saying, for the sake of philosophy and for the sake of understanding our experience, we need to set it aside, not deny it. He never denies it. In a sense, he's saying, science has its thing to do. It's following its lights in the right direction. It has to. And philosophy has to do something else because something's got lost here. Something's gotten lost in the shuffle. If what we end up with is an idea of our experience which has no relation to our actual experience, something's wrong. So that's what he proposes, and he follows this. For a good example of what he's talking about here is the concept of world. Now, world, of course, is a word that's thrown around, means all kinds of things, totality of what exists and so forth. It means, the earth, maybe. There are lots of different meanings that are associated with the concept of world. But Husserl's idea is, yes, it's the totality of what's experienced, but from the subjective point of view. And in that sense, we can say that everything that we experience is part of the world, that we all live in the same world in that sense. But at the same time, we can say your world and my world are perhaps somewhat different because of our different life stories.
Yeah, and perception and context. And...
Exactly, yeah. So this, world, and this is a thing that's taken up centrally by Heidegger, is really a very phenomenological concept. And it's used by all these thinkers. It's become part of, ordinary speech. And that, I think, is one of the lasting contributions, even to think about the works, thinking about subjectivity, about experience. This is not about just private experience. It's about experiencing the world, experiencing this thing, that thing, experiencing other people and how we interact with them. What's really important for the message that I want to deliver here is that Husserl has to separate himself from the task of science. And interestingly enough, just think what's going on while he's doing this. Husserl published his first important book, in 1900. In 1905, Einstein's introducing relativity. 1915, all this stuff is going on. And Husserl knows exactly. He may not understand it, but he's in an academic milieu where everybody knows. And he also knows mathematics very well. So he knows that all this stuff's going on. But what he's saying is, let's put it aside, and do something else. So that's the main message that I want to deliver here. I don't know how much.
We still have
Yeah, take your
Yeah.
time. It's...
Well, okay, I just wanted to point out that this is another kind of historical, interesting fact for philosophers anyway, that Husserl was not the only one who was doing this at that time. British philosophy was also changing, and I think it was in some somewhat similar ways. There was a revival of so-called common sense philosophy in Britain. This is a term that it dates from 100 years before, but it was a kind of neo-common sense philosophy. G.E. Moore was the major figure here. And then this was followed by so-called ordinary language philosophy. The main, perhaps, was Searle and Austin and people like that. And then the later Wittgenstein was also one of them who focused on language, on ordinary language. And that what they're saying is very similar to Husserl in one way, and that is they're saying our idea of the world around us We don't get it from science. We get it from the language we use, the ordinary language, not the special, not the
Not
technical
sophisticated
language,
one,
but
technical,
ordinary
yeah.
language. And everybody who works in science and the lab, so forth, leaves the lab, goes home, and sits down at the table, and lives in it.
Ordinary life and having ordinary discussions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So this current in analytic philosophy looks very different because it doesn't have all the methodological stuff that Husserl has or Heidegger has. But I would say that it's doing something very similar, that the philosophy has to give up the idea of following the science in every detail and basing everything that we say on that. That leads nowhere. At the same time, as far as the English-speaking world is concerned, of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on, and one of the things that's going on is this comes from the positivists again. I mean, this is the rise of neo-positivism or logical positivism and a certain kind of materialism. And one of the people I mentioned here at the end of this paper is Wilfrid Sellars, who was a teacher of mine and has become, he's dead now, but he's became, I think, one of the most important philosophers in the English-speaking world for his time, and was extremely important for people like Daniel Dennett and the forget the names. There are a lot of other names that you can mention who are part of this realist. Well, the point is, these philosophers take the exact opposite tack from the one I'm describing. In other words, they're saying to set science aside. How can you do that? I mean, the job of philosophy is to follow the science, take seriously what it says, and then, if you want to explain experience or whatever, start from there.
So basically, philosophy follows science and come after. So science discover new things, and then philosophy should explain that.
Yeah, should explain that. And what Sellars does, his most famous writing is called The Manifest Image of Man or something, of reality, and the Scientific Image. And what he says, the manifest image, as the name implies, is that superficial, and Sellars happened to know the history of philosophy very well, and so he knew all this stuff. But science was developing, as he says, before our very eyes. It's happening now. And it's our job as philosophers to keep up and make sure we understand and base everything we say on that. So that, of course, appealed to a lot of people. One of the things that they wanted to explain, of course, is the big big puzzle is what's the relationship between the brain and the mind, and that all had to be explained ultimately in physical terms or anatomical, biological terms. Well, it hasn't gone very well, but that's all right. It's a big job, and I'm not, saying that it can't be done, but it's a lot harder than I think was originally thought. But that's not my point, really. The point here is that, I mean, they can go ahead and search for that particular, pot of gold as long as they can, as long as they want. But to understand the richness of human experience, we need to, as Husserl would say, bracket that and follow human experience itself in its own way. And we got a much more, we got a better understanding of human experience in that way. However, we also lose something. It means that, in a sense, the traditional task of philosophy is being cut in half, and it's supposed to tell us what's real. And phenomenology is giving up on that. Let the scientists tell us what's real. Follow our own description of experience for its own sake. And the point is, he's not denying science. He's putting it on its own track. And
now we need to be aligned. Like science follow the light, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
And phenomenology bring philosophy in, asking questions about what is real without necessarily following what science and
Exactly.
the mathematician.
Yeah, that's right. That's my claim anyway. And as I say, it's very rich, and it's a line of thinking that's produced a lot of interesting results. Phenomenology has had an influence on psychology, on cognitive science. Even there's a journal called Phenomenology and Cognitive Science, and people in all over the world, but I think especially in places like Denmark, in Nordic countries, are trying to develop these ideas. They impinge to some extent on scientific work and in cognitive science and neurology and so on, but they're not trying to give a final, scientific explanation of these. Just trying to describe it. That's what. So phenomenology is always just description. But if you focus on description, you give up something. You give up explanation. That's something that a lot of philosophers can't stand. Philosophy is supposed to be about everything. You're supposed to put all the stuff together and into a single
monolithic
theory of everything, right? But people who follow Husserl and that tradition, I think, are really saying, sorry, it can't be done. We'll do our thing, you do yours. So it ends up being somewhat controversial, I think, and that's why a lot of people reject it, because it's not doing everything. It's not doing what philosophy was from the beginning supposed to do, according to Aristotle and so on. So maybe I can stop there. I don't know how.
Yeah, I think it's good. We can start the discussion.
Can we have maybe some questions already from you guys?
Or can I ask
questions
go first before
go
we
ahead.
open the?
I think we can have
short,
maybe a 10 minutes or
right.
15 minutes discussion, and then we will take a break, 5 minutes, and then we open up for.
Okay.
So thank you so much, David, for this rich presentation. Much to think about. So I have a lot of questions, but I will start with this one because you know and understand Kant very well, and as we all know, the question, the task of Kant's, especially Kritik der reinen Vernunft, was something quite similar, you could say, because he asked this question whether metaphysics also
is possible.
Possible as a science, and
right,
and it was no. And
the answer was no. Right.
Yes.
That's right.
So it is.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, that's a little simplistic, because
right.
Kant said that, but then he went on to use the term metaphysics for some of his own work, and it was. I think what he meant by that was the metaphysics of the schools. That is, the metaphysics of the scholastics, of Leibniz, and people like that. So there's a certain set of questions that metaphysicians were trying to answer, and Kant said, you can't do it.
Not that way. So, but I thought it would be interesting to hear more about Husserl's background related to this, like Kant. Because, there's, and you even wrote in this book, A Paradox of Subjectivity.
Yeah.
You write this long, beautiful chapter about Kant and Husserl, and up to Heidegger and their relationship. And it's very much related to this topic that you just dealt with today. So maybe you can say a little bit about that. Like,
Well, I do
Husserl's-
think that Kant and Husserl are very close in many ways, and they use similar terminology, transcendental this and transcendental that. And so Husserl does eventually take over a lot from Kant. And as you say, Kant's questions are not only about metaphysics, of course, he also asks how is science possible? How is mathematics possible? And he comes up with answers to these questions, but they manage to be answers that he thinks are not really metaphysical. Because what he wants to experience, by the way, is a big word in Kant. And when he says, how are these things possible? The reason he's asking that question is he doesn't think the empiricists can answer that. In other words, if you just focus on sense experience, you'll never get concepts like force and gravity and things like that. He's very convinced that Newton had said the last word on science, so it was all done. He also thought that Euclid had the last word on mathematics. So clearly he was looking at things from a certain historical point of view, but the empiricist didn't really give us an answer. He knew a lot about Hume, he's a big fan of Hume, but he thought Hume didn't tell us enough. So he thought that in order to come up with scientific inquiry and scientific theory, we had to have more than just sense experience. We had to have concepts, and they were not concepts derived from experience, they're a priori concepts. So that was...
Right.
I mean, and what Husserl does, especially in relation to science, experience, and so forth, is very similar.
And another thing I thought would be interesting to talk about more is Husserl and his work on consciousness. I mean, he was influenced by Brentano, obviously, and what was important for Husserl was this first-person perspective, and that's related to what you explained today. That's the experience. It's the first-person experience. That's the core point. That's the idea. And so to me, it's I ask myself whether this focus or this focus on consciousness or first person experience, it is a recognition of consciousness, and this consciousness is of something. It comes with an object, which is the world. So it is our experience. It is about our experience of the world. Right. So, but here, what I think Husserl is describing, but not as clear as Heidegger, is that this experience is a subjective experience, meaning that there is a subject of this experience. This is me, and I am experiencing the world, but at the same time, I'm in this world. So
in the world that I'm experiencing.
Exactly. So I am part of this world and part of this experience, actually. So, and this, this I think is better described by Heidegger's work, for example, like Sein und Zeit and being in the world. And Husserl, so I want to ask, how do you think Husserl dealt with this aspect, that it is about my subjective first-person experience of the world, and yet I am still in the world and I'm part of this world?
Well, I think he was completely aware of that, and he even talks about it in several places. I just think, one thing that you didn't mention, but I think it needs to be mentioned here, is the concept of intentionality.
Right.
That is, what that means is that all consciousness is consciousness of something. You don't just have consciousness. You have things person's world, right, of which we're conscious. And so so you might say this is the subject-object relation, right? You never have the subject by itself. I mean, I'm conscious of the world, but I'm also conscious of myself being conscious of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He says that pretty clearly. It's called, I mean, Sartre had a good expression for that. He called it, what did he call it? I'm trying to remember. Pre, um, Pre-objective, maybe pre-subjective experience. He had a way of
Pre-reflective.
Pre-reflective consciousness. Yeah, that's right. In other words, there's reflective consciousness, in which I'm aware of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But even if I'm aware of you and anything else, I'm also at the same time aware of myself. And he even had an expression in French for that, which was conscience de soi, which he put the de in parentheses in order to say it wasn't an objective consciousness, a pre-objective consciousness. So, and he thought he got that from Husserl.
Right. But what my question was also pointing at the fact that what Husserl does is so, it's all about something that is subjective. It's about what is experienced, my consciousness. So, but it is my consciousness of the world, like I said, and I am part of this world.
Right.
So, but this pre-reflective consciousness is, again, just going deeper into myself instead of going out to the world, recognizing the fact that I am in the world as a part of the world. That's why I thought that Heidegger's description of being, and he didn't want to, proactively, want to use the term consciousness,
right,
because of this, I think. So he described it better, this ontological / existential aspect of our being, not just having experience or experiencing or perceiving the world, but as part of the being, part of the world.
right.
And I wanted to ask how Husserl, I mean, obviously Heidegger was very much influenced by Husserl too, and
yeah, but I think, well, he tried to avoid admitting that influence, partly by all the fancy terminology that he made up, which was designed to avoid. I mean, Husserl used very standard, and in that way, he was not a very good writer. He was trying to express new ideas with old language, and so that got him in trouble sometimes, I think. And of course, Heidegger, in my view, is trying to express old ideas with new language. I mean, old in the sense that they really are not that different from.
And I think this question is related to this other question that I wanted to raise. So with this first person subjective experience, conscious experience, Husserl wanted to describe what we experience, right? That's what you described today, what you explained today. And so I want to ask again, although you explained sufficiently probably, like, why was it important for Husserl to leave the science and focus on this aspect, like to describe this subjective experience?
Well, I think because he thought it had never been properly understood before. I mean, that was it was. I mean, this is what I meant by saying that following physical theory leads to a kind of distortion. Gives us a picture of all these things, sensations running around in our head. I don't see any sensations in my head. I don't ever feel my head except when I have a headache or something. But so is that a good answer?
But at the same time, I mean, I think a criticism could arise in the sense that then what Husserl did was trying to separate this subjective experience and my consciousness from the world and the science, and why does he have to do that? And what do we get from that?
Well, how can you say that it's separated from the world when you say that consciousness is always of something? It's of the world.
But it is because it is my subjective experience,
Yeah.
my subjective perception. So I'm just asking a question, like a possible
Right. Well, yeah,
criticism.
I see what you mean, but I think that one of the things that in describing experience that Husserl had to deal with is how we experience other persons. And that means it's not just my experience now, but it's also your experience. And how do those two relate? And so you're not just an object for me, you're also another subject. So we can speak not just of the I, but also of the we. You know something about that?
Right, a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And, so he believes it's important to, starting from the self, to be sure.
So,
But when he moves out into the world, and when he encounters not just, apples and oranges, but other people and communities of other people, and the story goes on.
I asked this. I'm sorry. I
No,
asked
go
this
ahead.
question because you said in the lecture that Husserl wanted to leave what science is doing, like trying to explain the reality, but don't do that, and we describe what we experience. So this could give an impression. That's what I'm saying, that people could get this impression that this is a separation. That's what I meant. This could give that impression that Husserl's not engaging with the
sciences.
Right.
Well, I think in a certain sense that's true. I mean, that's sort of what I was trying to say.
Right. But then why is it important for Husserl? That was the question. Why does he have to do that? And why did we want to do that?
Because he thinks that what's important for him is to understand and describe experience. And he thinks that trying to somehow fit that into a physical, materialistic explanation, it's not going to get anywhere.
So do you think it's fair to say that actually through Husserl's stance and his ideas, we can ask whether what science is doing is also what we experience to some extent in the end, because that's the reality that is given to us, and that's something that's explainable to us in the end. It's not to everything else that's existing. Like we don't even know if other beings have the same level or similar experience or perception and understanding. But so in the end, even what science does, even if science even if science is supposed to be something objective opposed to something subjective, that is still something that is objectively perceived and understood by us.
You mean if we take an example in science and you use a microscope, this is an experience also of perceiving things?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's an example of perception.
I'm taking the example of Eric, by the way.
Yeah, in the end, it is.
It's seeing him.
No. I mean, we discussed yesterday, and I think he gave this example. And I think the idea was exactly what you were saying. Basically, when you use a microscope and you see small things, we are experiencing at another level of experience.
So this declaration of science, this declaration of objectivity of science, has to be also reconsidered and revisited. Is that?
Well, the philosophy of science is a very important part of phenomenology.
Yeah.
But the philosophy of science in that sense is not itself scientific. It's trying to understand science and in doing so, trace it back to experience. So one of the things we do is look through microscopes, and that's a form of perception, but not our direct perception. It's an instrumental, and you can get into all kinds of stories about the way our experience is instrumentalized. I mean, we can start talking about AI now. AI now.
AI is this is a really good topic, by the way. It's like how our life will be impacted by AI and what is our perception.
Right.
Because this is for the first time we see something that reproduce human capabilities, like
Yeah.
language.
Well, I don't know much about this, right? So don't expect me to
It's fine.
produce any wisdom on the subject. But I mean, all these things are connected. But I mean, phenomenology can never ignore science because it's what's going on. I mean, interesting passage has just occurred to me from The Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking about you know, Einstein, really. I mean, the Michelson-Morris experiments? No, Morrison. Anyway, very important experiment. Somebody in Cleveland, you know, did a. And what Husserl says is Einstein would have no use whatsoever for a physical description of Mr. Michelson. What he needs is what Mr. Michelson says and what he has to offer about. So, in other words,
That's what I wanted to point out, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just one passage that he, you know, kind of shows that he's very much aware of what's going on in Einstein and also in mathematics. But anyway, are we going to take a break or?
Yeah, I think we can take a break. So I see many people are in the.
You got some people out there?
Yeah, we have 22 people, so it's great.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and you know many people will watch after. But the good thing is that we can have a 5-minute break, and then for the people that are watching, we will put on the chat the Google Meet, so you can join. The camera is over there, so we will put the. I was looking at Eric.
You're going to put them on there?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or Eric
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, so Eric, he's alone, but after the break, many people will join.
I see.
Pardon.
Okay.
So the camera is over there. So we will put the link, the Google Meet on the chat, on Discord. Anyway, I think you can join us in 5 minutes. We will share the slide as usual. We try to put painting that are related to the topic and some quotes. And we have chosen Cézanne and Merleau-Ponty quotes. I think we will all comment this and get back.
Great.
So
Okay.
see you.
See you.
J'avais des questions, mais j'ai pas pu intervenir en fait. J'allais sauter un moment, puis. Vous m'entendez plus? Ouais, mais ça. Bah, j'ai 2-3 questions, mais je les poserai au début de la session de questions. C'est sûr qu'il n'y a pas le son sur YouTube avant de parler comme ça. Là, je vais. Il y a la musique, c'est bon.
Voilà, we are back. There's people waiting.
See if I
Let me-
recognize any of the names.
Maybe you will recognize some names, yeah. Je nous mute ici quand même. Voilà, voilà. Marina.
Well, nobody so far, but
Alors. Donc, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, why do we see this?
So we can begin with Eric's question.
Yes,
and-
maybe we can start. So, welcome everybody first. For those that join the call,
I cannot hear you, Adèle.
let me check what's going on. On m'entend pas. Ok, je sais.
Mm.
Now you should hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, it's me.
Cool.
So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. We are very happy to have people anyway and take part of the discussion. I think Eric, you had some question, and you can go ahead, and maybe then we can come back to the commenting Cézanne painting. We had a few minutes of discussion. I think that would be good to talk about Cézanne and Merleau-Ponty. But Eric, go ahead. Why you don't start?
Well, first, thanks a lot for the nice presentation discussion. It was very interesting.
I think I need a little more volume. Can you?
Okay, I don't know if it's on my side.
No, it's on my side again. Eric, just before you start, for those that are on the Google Meet, just please raise your hand and then I will give you the mic. Eric, go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. So, I mean, I got, I mean, as you say, my own perception and my own world. And you also talked about, so I have my own bias. And so when you were presenting, you say at some point, like, you know, one of the role of philosophy historically was being to follow science.
Yeah.
And then the separation started a little bit. But it happens that, I mean, in science recently, we have something big coming with artificial intelligence. And, you know, maybe also that's a good time to philosophy to start also, you know, copying back with science in a way and try to incorporate that. And where I want to come is about what we talked about today, is that AI is a way to simulate reality or part of reality.
Mm-hmm.
A simulation which is so good, so great that, you know, even best humans can be fooled by it. And we start, you know, having a real experience of fake. So, which is, you know, so good that, you know, it kind of make it real because we are experiencing it. And
Did you
it
say
happens
fake?
because
Did you say fake or fate?
fake.
Fake.
F-A-K-T.
Right. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, I mean, how does it impact, you know, all this reasoning you were presenting? And
Yeah.
I mean, what does it imply if, you know, we can experience all the different reality, if we can start remodeling it? It's, you know, because behind the wall of our perception, I mean, these things is becoming, you know, an alternative reality.
Well, yeah. So in other words, you're playing with the concept of reality, right? As if we all understood what that meant, right? But that's okay. And then you're saying that there's something now that is so good at imitating reality that we can't tell the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the
yeah? And so I'm wondering, like, what is the impact compared to all the previous things you have?
Yeah. Well, I think this is I don't know. I hate to say it's not new, but you know, we spend probably 80% of our lives in unreality. We imagine, we read, we dream, we think about the past, we plan for the future, and so you know, reality from the experiential point of view is really only a small part of what we experience. I mean, so I'm focused as a phenomenologist on experience, describing the experience, right? Now, distinguishing reality from fake, that's another part of, that's something else we do. It's part of our experience. The mechanics of that, that's the stuff you're concerned with, how that happens. Am I right? I mean, I don't know, but you're describing something that seems to me you're taking it as a great accomplishment that one can be so good at faking reality, right? I mean, is that the point?
I'm not sure it's great, but it's an accomplishment, that's for sure.
Well, you think it's so you think it's dangerous or bad or
I mean, the thing is that I don't really understand, what would be the implication of not being able to check if things are real or not, if we are not sharing the same one, if we can start remodel it, like we will feel better in that alternate reality.
yeah.
Because I mean, ultimately, I mean, when it was like the real reality, at some point, you can be educated to it, you can check things, you can experience,
Sure.
or someone can show you. With all this fake, I mean, there may be things you will never know.
You can't do that, huh? You can't check it. You can't. Is that what you're saying? That it's such a good fake
Yeah.
that we can't.
It's behind your perception. So if you don't have direct access to a way to validate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, normally if something comes up that you think is real, then you look at it, and you think, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong there. It doesn't square with this or with that, and so it must be something. Well, I think it's very interesting to me that you're presenting this in a very negative way. That is, there's a real problem here.
So
What I find interesting is that when people talk about, and look, I don't know anything about AI, I don't, but the way people talk about it is either they're all for it, they think it's absolutely great, or they think it's a great danger to humanity or something.
I don't think that's easy.
Dichotomy. I mean, you can do great things with it. I mean, no problem with that. I'm just, also we must consider also the negative impact, and I'm not, considering one or the other. I mean, it's a whole. It's just that, at some point it will become also part of our reality. Like it's, and I'm wondering like if it's this simulation and the real stuff will not at some point fuse in our perception.
How I understood was whether it is verifiable or not, this reality that is simulated by AI, right? And when it's not verifiable, like the other reality that we're in now, then how do you understand that phenomenologically? It's rather that question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I don't understand exactly what I mean, look, Trump says millions of people came to his inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, so is that true? Well, we look at the cameras, we look at the pictures, not true. So there's a simple example of something that's not verifiable. It's falsifiable, right? Mm-hmm. So, the idea of checking to see if something's real or if a claim is real, a claim to reality is real, that has a long history. Now, I gather you're saying that there's something really new has entered the picture here, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of simple empirical verification is just no longer possible in some cases, right?
Yeah, or you can make it a reality, simulated reality, but you can make it real for people in their perception.
Make it real for people. Well, that just
means
means
perception.
Well, at least the perception.
Well, that means they accept it, right?
Yes. Unconsciously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that this problem of illusion, reality versus illusion, it's pretty old problem.
Right.
And
Okay.
But I think still this simulated reality is still slightly different from this illusion, because it's not just the illusion, but it is simulated reality that is sort of a reality, in fact. It's just that it's a
Well,
different kind of reality. It's a
Well, then it is reality. I mean, so if that's true, if it's, but it's, this is probably like the famous film, whose name I've forgotten.
Inception.
Inception or which one?
Which film? Christopher.
Keanu Reeves played the
Matrix.
Matrix?
Yeah.
What?
Matrix.
Matrix?
Yeah. Matrix.
That we are living in
Matrix.
simulation.
Matrix. We say Matrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh,
Matrix,
in French,
yeah.
okay.
Well, look,
Matrix.
that film, look, this was nothing more than a rehash of Descartes' meditations. Descartes had this idea long before. Look, we're sitting here, we're experiencing so forth. At night, we fall asleep, and we dream, and we think we're doing other things, right? So, what if it's all an illusion? I mean, how do we tell that it's not? That's the question that Descartes already raised. And I guess I keep saying this is all old stuff when you want to say it's new, but I mean these ideas, the problem of illusion, the problem of knowing what's real and what's not, has been around for a long time in philosophy, especially, and that we can do it better now or differently now. Sure, that's important. I tend to think, there are sort of political, and that's why I mentioned Trump, the political implications of this too, that feeling of being manipulated by somebody or something or some force that you don't recognize and that you don't want, but you can't avoid. I mean, that's a serious problem. And I don't know how to answer this, but I think you started off, as kind of riffing on the concept of reality that I was talking about a lot in my paper. And it seems to me you're taking for granted that there is a reality, but that it can also be
Simulation. Maybe we are living in a simulation.
maybe we are. Would we ever know? I don't know. I mean, that was the question that Descartes asked, in the first meditation.
Right.
Am I dreaming? How do I know? And of course, he thought the only way you could answer that question was to prove the existence of God, and then make sure that God wasn't the deceiver. Well, that's a pretty circuitous route to get an answer to that question, as most of his successors realized. But and it was also just a gimmick for him to prove the existence of God. But I think you're asking more practical. Philosophers don't deal in practical questions. We're famous for that. And we're proud of it too. But the practical questions are on your side. People like you are the ones that have to solve that.
But I think this is why we try to provoke those discussions. We don't understand. I mean, when we did a meeting, when we met the first time to prepare this seminar, and we highlighted the fact that even as of today, those AI things are not explainable. There is not theory behind that it can explain them. And the concern that we could have come from this, because it has positive aspects, but it could have also negative aspects. And the aim that our intention here is to bring people that are outside of the engineering or people to better understand.
Like me.
It comes back a little bit to what you said about Descartes and the simulation. Is who's holding the key of the simulation? Who is our God, and who will they be, and how will they, make our reality?
Yeah. I mean, another answer to Descartes, by the way, is so what? I mean, so this is all a big show put on by a malevolent God or whatever, he calls a malin génie.
Un malin génie, oui.
But you know, so what? I mean, nothing would change. We'd still be sitting around the table and talking, and so I mean, that's a good example, I think, of philosophers raising questions that they deliberately can't answer. I do, you know, everybody thinks that there's something subversive going on here. I mean, historically, it's very true. I mean, he believes in Galilean science, and he's trying to make it acceptable to the church because that was the reigning power at the time, and so that's why he's making up all these stories about dreams and stuff.
Just a comment from Sena Arslan that says, perhaps the experience offered in the AI system that imitated thing is the child of the tension Professor Carr mentioned in this talk, the tension between modern science and phenomenology.
Yeah, that's interesting. The tension
between modern science and phenomenology.
The child of that tension. Okay. Not sure I understand this eternity question here, but
it's more a comment.
Yeah.
Maybe Eric has more questions.
Yeah, I don't know if we cut Eric off here, but
do you have more questions, or other people can ask questions first and come back to Eric?
Yeah, there is. Yes, we can come back to Eric. If anyone has a question, please go ahead. I can see. Can you read it on the chat? So Dick,
Descartes, evil.
Eric, you can maybe read it.
No, I mean, if someone else wants to talk, I mean, I can give the floor, but otherwise I have another.
I think you can ask another question right
away. So the other one is also AI related. Sorry for being so obsessed with it. But you know, AI is also experiencing a world. It's a feed, or I would say experience, with a lot of data without direct access to reality. So it has also its own perception. It's built on top of, you know, this our own image and of the world. There's no, you know, real reasoning, and I'm wondering, like, you know, and this stuff will be embodied and interact with us. And I'm wondering, like, you know, will there be a philosophy of this AI system? A phenomenology for them too, because they're experiencing with their own eyes.
Well, I mean, I would say, you know, there's a difference between a philosophy of AI and a phenomenology of it. The philosophy is maybe interested in questions about reality and unreality and things like that. That's what philosophers traditionally do. And then you can ask questions, well, is this really intelligence or is it not intelligence? Well, it's artificial, it's not real. Incidentally, I mean, that's what artificial means. It means it's not real, right? It's man-made, as we say, right?
It's artificial.
Yeah, it's artificial.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's
really this is the name we give, but when artificial becomes so accurate that
so
it looks real, I mean,
then it ceases to be artificial, I guess. Yeah, right.
Well, we have to agree on what is intelligence. I think
intelligence. Hard enough.
Very hard. I mean, those systems are
right.
Not really
but anyway, I was distinguishing between a philosophy and a phenomenology. Now, a phenomenology would be a description of the experience, of using it, of interacting with it, and in that way, it'd be just like any other phenomenology or any other experience. And the question of its reality or its artificiality, I mean, these would be questions, these are practical questions, it seems to me. I mean, if it's a real problem, if you're worried whether this is real or not, figure out a way to decide that. I mean,
I think it's a very good point to distinguish between philosophy of AI and phenomenology.
I think so, yeah.
of
Yeah.
AI.
between philosophy of AI and phenomenology of AI.
Yeah, yeah, because
That's
one
what
is
this
interested
is
in the
about.
reality and the other is interested in
Okay.
the experience. And I think those are distinguishable.
Yeah,
things.
so it's about describing phenomenology of AI is about describing AI,
Right.
which
And
is
the
different from
experience, yeah.
yes, and experiencing it
Yeah.
rather than philosophy of AI, which is completely
Right.
Something else.
something
Yeah.
Right.
else. Yeah.
I'm
Like
not
you
sure
said,
what,
it's,
but-
it's asking about the reality and
I think Eric. So there, someone has raised his hand, but just before, so I will read again. So Sena Arslan say what I meant was phenomenology separated itself from modern science by the 20th century. Say talking to an LLM, to a chatbot like ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and it responding back
To you.
to you in a way that shows empathy is completely not real.
Okay.
If it's real, it would be like saying a calculator is a mathematician.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. A calculator is not imitating a mathematician,
right.
is it?
Mhm. Yeah, I think this is where there's a small difference. Like when you talk, I mean, when it shows empathy, if it shows it so well for your perception, from your perspective, it might feel like reality.
Yeah.
When you ask a calculator the result of a computation,
Well, a
I mean,
calculator operates according to mechanical rules. Mathematics operates according to mathematical rules. They're different things, but on a calculator, you can get results that match the mathematical truths, right? Now, I guess that's kind of the point. So, is a AI like the calculator? Is that the point?
Yeah, no, basically, perhaps philosophy should not leave itself out of the discussion regarding modern science and technology. Otherwise, it's getting really messy. So,
I don't think philosophy is really
so in that sense, I don't understand the necessity and merit of phenomenology. Voilà.
Show me which one is this?
So I'm reading the comments. It starts from here. Say
okay.
talking. You can go.
Right, I see it. Okay. But where does it go from there? I mean, is this the same comment?
Yeah, it's
Sorry,
the same person commenting on
Okay.
like the same person that says that the AI system is the child
Oh, right. Okay.
of
Yeah.
the tension between the modern science and phenomenology. And she gave the example of the calculator is not a
Right. Okay.
mathematician. And then she pursuing saying, perhaps philosophy should not leave itself out of the discussion regarding modern science and technology.
Well, I don't think it should leave itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's something to say. It's just a
Right.
question of how to say it, and I think maybe distinguish between the philosophy and the phenomenology is a useful way
Right.
of.
And I think it's important. And what David means is not that phenomenology should not have anything to do with this. It's just that it's not what we're expecting. It's not what we're expecting from philosophy of AI. That's what he's saying. But phenomenology of AI can be very useful, but just not in the sense that that it gives the answers of like metaphysical answers.
Yeah,
like-
or even
right,
answers to questions like, is it real, or is this real?
Exactly.
Is this
right.
real?
But
I mean-
phenomenology can be used for different aspects.
Yeah, I think I'm just improvising here, but it seems to me it might have a lot to do with how we feel about ourselves and what we can do. And
Enteleki, yeah, Enteleki of technology. That
Yeah.
was one of them.
Enteleki,
Yeah.
You know my paper. I'm sure I showed it to you. But anyways,
Enteleki. Well, that's a good Leibnizian term. Yeah, but yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's raises all kinds of questions about who we are and what we can do. What is essential to. I'm going to go for that one.
Yeah. Sure.
Right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, and of course, all of this is very closely related with existentialism and questions of what being human really means. How's that for a question, right?
This is a very good question, and when we talk about artificial intelligence, this is something that personally I'm not like concerned. Like one of the things that we tend to explain is we tend to anthropomorphize and when it comes to AI, and we talk about intelligence and artificial intelligence as something incredible. The output and the results are impressive. But then we compare this to human, and this is like something that has go far away from human intelligence. And I don't think that it does. I think human intelligence and humans are complicated and deeper than just the analytical mind.
Yeah.
And this is maybe one of the chance or the good thing I see in AI is that we will be forced somehow to better understand ourselves and better understand what we are really individually and also collectively.
Right.
We will be forced because AI will go far, far away. And I think in that sense, it's a chance. But we tend to, especially in the AI community, to minimize what is human. We don't really understand. And this is why we really want to have such discussion.
Yeah. Do you think is it too much focus on the calculative and the rational?
Yes.
And the linguistic?
Linguistic, I would say even materialistic vision of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
so emotions, anxiety, artistic creation. I mean, these are all things that people identify with human beings.
Yeah, even though AI can do or mimic human in those things, but maybe just one of like simple things. When we do work collectively, it seems like there is a collective mind, because just after discussing, some ideas comes like from nowhere.
Oh, sure, yeah, happens all the time.
Yes, and so what about AI? Can AI do these things? And so,
is there a we?
Yeah, good question.
So all these questions are being asked today, and there is different vision. Of course, some people think that AI will take over. Some people think that AI will be smarter, whatever. But I think what is interesting for us is really to understand AI and to understand human being, and I think that's the wisdom that we are looking for.
Yeah.
There is another person. Yes. Please go ahead, Modi, the elder. Sorry if I'm misspelling your name, but you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh yeah, no worries. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Go ahead.
My name is Gino. I'm a philosopher at Stony Brook. I apologize for spamming the chat with questions. Thank you for the wonderful talk, Professor Carr. I do have some questions about the framing of your talk, namely as phenomenology as like as something that takes for granted the something like the bifurcation of nature, the division of the world into primary and secondary qualities, or sort of the wedge driven by science between experience and our theories. And I guess it's just sort of like my half-baked question was that, is it plausible, or is the distinction between primary and secondary qualities something like a necessary confusion in the history of science, or is it like a necessary sort of signpost that phenomenologists have to work past? Because one sort of approach to phenomenology doesn't necessarily presuppose this idea that presuppose a conception of science that already sort of interprets experience as something like first order sense data that we sort of have to explain now with some kind of cognitive science. There's other sort of philosophical approaches that try to show that there's a way in which science can already be taken as an experiential task from the very beginning. And I guess I'm a little confused about what you perceive the role of phenomenology to be here, which is it that we are trying to set up a division of labor between describing experience and explaining it, or are we trying to do maybe as what Whitehead talks about, where we're going to recast science as a refinement of experience, without the sort of called bifurcation of nature. And so I'll just leave it there. That's my first question.
Yeah. Oh, that's the first question. All right. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by the bifurcation of nature. Is that a Whiteheadian term? I don't know. Is that?
I basically mean any sort of like, you take your ontological beam splitter and you cut the world into illusion and reality, or perception and reality, or experience and reality, or phenomena, noumena, primary and secondary. The thing that we say we have access to and experience, but then the real stuff, you know, the good ontological stuff that we can only.
Well, of course, that bifurcation is that phenomenology didn't invent that. That was the presupposition of the whole talk, in a way, that split had been made as part of the development of modern science, and it wasn't, and that constitutes the problem, not the solution.
So you think the bifurcation of nature is in some sense artificial, in the way that we're talking about it?
Well, I'm not talking about the nature here. I'm talking about scientific conceptions of nature, phenomenological approach to nature, and I'm leaving, one of my saws that I do in philosophy, very anti-metaphysical. I think metaphysical questions are interesting and everybody wants to know the answers, but I agree with Kant, basically, that we're probably not going to get any, and we should, stick to our own sandbox and try to understand our own. And it's a kind of existential approach, I guess you'd say, dealing with human reality with not just perception, of course, emotions and things like that. I don't know where that bifurcation comes in there, but it's true that I'm splitting off certain traditional metaphysical questions, and I'm saying, you can answer them. If you can answer them, good luck to you, but I'm not going to try. As I said, something gets lost in the process that I'm proposing here, and I admit that. So phenomenology can't do everything.
Then I guess just a quick follow-up then, because in some of like Husserl's later stuff, like the analyses, he talks about the relationship between phenomenology and science. And he associates the theoretical sciences with what he would like regional ontologies. Mm-hmm. And he sort of says is that what phenomenology will do is we will take ontology as a leading clue, is one of the phrases he uses. And we will then go in and we'll do this sort of phenomenological description of the theoretical sciences, and we're going to clarify them. And so there's a way in which ontology and phenomenology will be allies, is what he says. And I guess how does that, and I guess my question is this, how should we sort of stylize this description? Is this really a division of labor? Yeah. Are we really saying that phenomenology can sort of offer its own models or change our self-conception of science? Well, for example, I'm also sort of iffy on the distinction between description and explanation in the first place. I posted a long question about that in the chat, but I'll leave that question alone for a minute.
Remember that Husserl uses the term ontology in a very special way. Ontology is subordinate to phenomenology for him. And phenomenology just means that we focus our attention on the object rather than on the subject or the combination of the two. So, sure, he has regional ontologies of nature, of human experience, of psyche, and so on. And those are not ontological in the sense of metaphysical, I would say. I mean, they're just ways of splitting up the phenomenological description into its component parts.
Okay.
Does that help?
Do you want to ask the other question that you wrote on the chat?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess then sort of this is like Dan Zahavi a little bit, who I'm channeling. He sort of has this idea that a phenomenology of science, right? We started talking about describing experience as opposed to explaining reality, but there's a way in which, right, there's wiggle room, right? One can have a description that's so good that it renders a causal structure unnecessary. One can have a description that's so good that one realizes, like sort of in a Wittgenstein move, that what needed to be explained doesn't need to be explained by invoking an independent entity that serves a causal function interacting
Oh, I
with
see. This is a kind of, yeah. Where is this in Dan Zahavi? I know Zahavi's work pretty well, so.
This is his paper on this is sort of another question I had. He has a paper on why phenomenologists don't necessarily need to pay attention to the terms like bracketing or the epoche.
Oh. I think he's wrong about that.
Another question about how essential you think that phenomenological move is for doing phenomenological work.
Yeah. Well, certainly a lot of phenomenologists don't use it and don't appeal to it at all. But I think they do it implicitly, just in virtue of the way they're trying to describe things. So, I guess I differ with Dan on that point, but yeah, so I'm not sure how to answer your question, but I do think that the epoche is important. And it really, it really does cut off certain questions, I think. Renders them not useless, but not useless for us in phenomenology. That would be my answer. Okay?
All right, fair enough.
Well, thanks for your question.
Thank you. Yeah.
And
Any questions so far?
Aurora.
Let me check.
Say hello to my friends at Stony Brook.
Go ahead, Aurora, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you very well. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I'm not a philosopher, so I think I have a pretty straightforward question. How does doing research in subjective experience affects your own experience in your own life? Because I feel like I'm interested in experience, but we could also be interested in creating experiences like
Yeah.
artists, or you could people could want to have more experience, like unusual experiences or outer states of consciousness. But how do you reflect on your life choice of doing research in this? And did you make a decision to do it, or it just happened and lasted for so long?
Good question. Well, I don't know. For me, of course, because I was educated in the standard way, philosophy came first, and then phenomenology, which I discovered later. So I had, a kind of childish interest, I guess, in philosophy and of standard questions. Also, religious questions were in the background, and that's somewhat typical, I think, of a lot of people in philosophy. But turning to experience as a subject of analysis or description in phenomenology, I think you don't have to have more experiences to be able to do that. We have plenty of experiences all the time, and plenty to go around, you could say. Enlarging your sphere of experience is a great thing, but you don't need phenomenology to do that, or philosophy either. So, I wouldn't claim that phenomenology helps me have more experiences or better experiences or anything like that. Experience is what it is. If you're lucky, you have some good ones and not many bad ones. But whatever it is, from the philosophical point of view, you want to understand them. And understanding is what I'm looking for. Everybody wants experiences. I've had some great ones, but understanding is what counts the most. So you're not a philosopher. So what are you? An artist?
No, I studied mathematics and now I'm studying computational neuroscience.
Well, all
But
right.
it's not really explaining consciousness or phenomenology.
No, it's not. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, thanks for your question. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aurora.
Um,
Do you have another question, Aurora, or is it? Are you fine?
Maybe also, do you know people who are philosophers in phenomenology, but they do more art or some more pragmatic things that is related to this?
There are a lot of people in phenomenology now who are trying to do that. I mean, I don't know what you mean by pragmatic, but people are interested in, political questions, questions of,
phenomenologist method. That was.
gender and all the sort of latest topics in social philosophy and
social
things like
sciences and yeah.
that. Yeah. So yes, a lot of people are doing that. I'm a little bit skeptical because I don't want to claim that phenomenology can do more than it really can, and I'm a kind of minimalist, I just don't want to claim too much for what I'm doing.
All right.
Thank you. We have
Thank
another
you.
question from.
That's not his name.
Oh, yeah, it's not his name. Forgot his name. I'm sorry, but you can go ahead. I think you've raised your hand.
Okay, yeah.
What's your name, by the way? Sorry.
Oh, Gino.
Gino. Okay, go ahead, Gino.
I guess I had another question. I was curious to know what sort of role that Sellers was playing in your thought, and also I'm just sort of curious in learning more about his disposition to phenomenology. I mean, he's kind of a hard philosopher to pin down for me.
Yes, he is.
So I was just curious what your thoughts about.
Well,
Sellers.
he knew everything. He was, as I said, he was one of my teachers way back, and he knew the history of philosophy backward and forward. But he was really a kind of crusader for new materialism. And I think what I discovered in going back to him after many years is that he was really one of these philosophers who thought that the public had to be educated about science. And they had to be educated to accept it whole hog. I mean, he didn't really distinguish between good science and bad. He assumed that science was a kind of unified endeavor, and the task of philosophy is to make room for science, make it respectable. Because one of the problems of philosophy had been that there was a lot of opposition to materialism. People argued for idealism and all kinds of other things that somehow departed from scientific orthodoxy. So he wanted that to happen. I think that's rather odd in a way, because I don't think science needs have philosophy being a cheerleader in the background, right? It can do its own thing, and it's perfectly capable of that, and it's done wonders. I mean, it's had its own history of, detours and mistakes and so forth, from the theory of the ether to, Lamarckism and, blah, blah, all the pseudosciences that are around, well, they work themselves out. And so anyway, I think that's a way of understanding Sellers that I didn't before when I studied with him. I didn't study with him much. I took a few courses from him, but I think that was his shtick, so to speak, and that's what a lot of his students were very enthusiastic about. So he founded a whole school, of analytic philosophy in Pittsburgh. I mean, he left Yale, took a couple of logicians with him, some other teachers of mine, who and started a whole school of analytic philosophy. But it wasn't just, it wasn't ordinary language. It wasn't language. It was hardcore metaphysics, basically. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, that's very interesting. That actually, I mean, you can sort of see a physicalism in his argumentation, but it's actually quite a nuanced physicalism, right? Because there's a way in which that Sellers, going back to this division between like primary and secondary qualities, or describing our own experience versus a scientific description of reality. There's a way in which when you read Sellers, he is trying to sort of smush them into one theoretical description, but he's sort of careful to leave open what that is, in the sense of like not necessarily having like a metaphysical foundationalism,
right,
as a traditional philosophy would want to do.
Well, that's true. I think he tried to avoid foundationalism, and empiricism, very critical of certain aspects of empiricism, including even logical empiricism. So yeah, that's right. He was a very complicated philosopher, no question. I was dealing here with this kind of programmatic essay that you may know called the Manifest and the Scientific Image of Man, which is kind of at the beginning of his Science, Perception, and Reality book. That's just a collection, really, of essays.
6.
Yeah. No, I have a quick. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Eric?
I open Gino. Is it okay? Everything is okay. Okay, super.
Okay.
I have a question. A quick question about what is your take or your vision on why Merleau-Ponty was interested by Cézanne as a phenomenologist. I would love to hear.
Yeah, well, he, as I said before, as I remember it, I mean, it's been a long time actually since I read that essay on Cézanne, but as I remember it, the main message is Cézanne was a phenomenologist in the sense that he was describing not nature or Mont Saint-Victoire or whatever it is, but the experience thereof. Seeing. It was about seeing. So he's giving us in his paintings an account of what it means to see something. And so that was, and that's what phenomenology does too. Tell us what is seeing? What does it mean? So that's my understanding of that.
It's not about reproducing exactly the image, but trying to express the perception.
Yeah, and he talks about somewhere, the apples and the oranges and things.
They are not. He doesn't respect he doesn't do exactly the perspective.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and you can sort of see them taking shape in front of the eyes, and I think that's a very accurate. I mean, I'm not an expert on painting, but I can see that, and he's written a lot of other stuff on painting too. He's very sensitive to that. So it's a wonderful illustration. I mean, I think phenomenology has a lot to say about art, not just painting, music too, and architecture. And I know people, James Dodd, people written about architecture from a phenomenological point of view. I talk about what it means to be in space, move around in space, and built space, and that kind of thing can be done very well from a phenomenological point of view. And what that means is they're not trying to explain how you build something or why it's pleasing or any of these old questions. They're just trying to explain how it's experienced. So it turns out to be more than just philosophy, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Eric, do you have another question?
No,
or a comment?
But I mean, maybe a comment. I mean, because I'm close to Gino's question and Senna comment about the bifurcation between science and philosophy seems to be a theme which is rising. And is there any needs to reconcile them, or are we just friends?
Well, I think you do it at your risk, because you can get immersed in scientific questions and mix them up with phenomenological questions. I think that's a mistake. I think it's better to allow them each their own trajectory or their own route, and not mix them up. But I have to admit that, a lot of philosophers won't buy this for a minute. Why? Because traditionally, philosophy is supposed to take everything in, put things together, not tear them apart. And I'm suggesting a kind of division of labor, right? Which, based on my own experience, not my personal experience, but as a philosopher, and what Husserl, I think, also saw, which was that attempting to explain experience scientifically is a dead end. It's not going to take you anywhere. It's just, you're going to end up with a hybrid mishmash that doesn't make any sense. That's my view.
But still, I think this bifurcation, especially between phenomenology and science, I think we're experiencing or expecting or going through already a big turn. Like, it's different from
With AI.
Yeah.
Well, maybe.
New
Maybe so.
technologies. I mean,
You're more convinced than I am, but and I think even more than he is. I don't know.
I'm not. Yeah.
It seems to me there's an element of skepticism in your.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
There is. I think we human beings can do very good things, but we can do also.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I would love to see AI as a tool, useful, un outil, as you say in French, that serves human. And for that, I think, because it goes far away, as I said earlier, I think we have to understand ourselves.
yeah, that's what I mean too.
Then we all agree.
Yes.
Okay.
It was. I think we are good. More than 2 hours. 2 hours.
That's so,
live.
that's right.
Eric, so
You're doing so well.
thank you all. Thank you for
you so much.
Gino, Aurora, and all the questions, Sena, and others in the chat. And thank you for all the participants. Maybe a few words before we leave. I think next, let me show you very quickly this next slide here. This is going to be, yeah, this is the one that we like, Cézanne, Le Passage. I think in French, but in English it has another forest scene, they called it in English.
Forest scene.
Yeah, but I think it's Le Passage.
Le Passage.
Le Passage, yeah, pass from Majoli to Château Noir.
Sounds like Walter Benjamin. He
Yeah.
writes about passage.
But yeah, so next session, Heyong, we don't have a date yet, but we will have many announcements, and the next one is going to be about geometry of conversation. Maybe you can say a few words very quickly.
Right. It's going to be about consciousness and conversation, where we want to talk about consciousness, especially shared consciousness, in terms of conversation with visual mathematics like geometry and topology. And it's gonna be a joint talk with me and mathematician Louis Kaufmann. And it will be recorded though first, and then we're going
to post it on September, something early
Right.
September.
Yeah.
Okay. No, so, and I mean the thing is that people has to join us if you want to stay in touch. Basically, we will do all this announcement during August, and September. So many things are coming. Many seminars on September. Heyong.
Yes.
Many things. Many seminars. So there is this one with Kaufman and others. So just if you want to know what's coming next, please follow us. Join Join us on our network or social network or YouTube channel. And again, merci beaucoup.
Thank
Well,
you
I
so
should
much.
add my thanks too.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
thank
great.
you. It's an honor to have you with us.
Yes.
My pleasure. So it's great.
Eric, merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.
Thank
We don't
you.
see you anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aurora. Thank you for everyone. And
Thank
see you
you.
to the next one.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.